Our next speaker, keynote speaker, is Dr. David Guralnick, the president and the CEO of New York-based Kaleidoscope Learning. His work synthesizes concepts from several fields with the goal of using new technology to create immersive experiences that reimagine education and training. He is also the president of the International E-Learning Association and the founding chair of the International E-Learning Awards program, as well as an adjunct professor at Columbia University. He is the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Advanced Corporate Learning, and his work is quite valuable in the field of innovation in education, and we're all very excited to have him as a keynote speaker today. Thank you very much for joining us today. And the title of his speech is Reimagining Education and Workplace Learning in a Changing World. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and thanks so much for inviting me. I'm going to talk today, as you mentioned, about reimagining education with a focus on the types of experiences that we can produce that can change the way that we work in workplace learning and also in education. So I'm going to start with a story. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a story. This is a story from the psychology literature, and it's one of those stories that kind of, everybody says it's happened to them, and it did not happen to me, but I will tell you the story anyway, and I will not pretend that it happened to me. There's an old story about a woman, and it could be a man, but it's a woman who was making a roast of beef in the oven, and she did it by cutting off the ends. And she would cut off the ends and put it in the oven. So you can see here, she cut off the end of the roast, put it in the oven. And she asked, why do this? There's seems to be no reason to cut off the end. Everything seems unnecessary. What does that do? And she said, that's a good question. Let me go ask my mother. This was how I was taught. This is how I've always done it. And she asked her mother, and said, why do we cut off the ends? Her mother said, that's a really good question. It's how I was taught. Let me ask my mother. So she went and asked her mother. So the grandmother, our original character. And why cut off the ends of the roast? What does that accomplish? And she said, well, when I learned to cook, we had a very small oven, and the roast wouldn't fit in the oven unless I cut off the ends. And so, the takeaway from the story is this is a tradition, and I'm very much in favor of tradition, but this is a tradition that didn't need to be maintained. This is a tradition that was designed for reasons that no longer were current, and it was time to rethink. Here they were throwing, it seemed like a waste, throwing things away for no reason, only because they hadn't taken the time to rethink what they were doing and why it was the way it was. So the original character here was just following traditional methods without really updating them to match the current reality. We are now at a time for rapid technological change, particularly in ways that can affect our work and learning and development. New technology changes can bring about new methods of interaction. And in my view, that's where a lot of the greatest opportunities are for us in terms of creating new types of learning experiences. We don't want to keep making the roast the old way when we can rethink it and do better. And there are things that we can do differently because we have new opportunities now, particularly thanks to technology. And that's kind of where my thinking is in terms of casting off old limitations, looking at things fresh and seeing what we can do that's different and reimagine and reinvent learning experiences that leverage the technology that we have. One thing I kind of like to do once in a while is look back at the technologies from the past. Every time there's been a technological advance, there are new methods of interaction, and those can help drive the learning experiences that we had. And we saw a little bit of this in the previous talk as well. So if we look back, in the old days, we had radio, right? So radio had audio, and audio in at least a somewhat, these are table radios that I'm showing here, a portable sense. It could be in your house, right? You could be, you could plug it in, couldn't carry it with you, but it would be in your house. That was the audio. Television, video, in your house. And again, both of these had some sort of on-demand nature. You could, couldn't watch anything you wanted on demand. You couldn't listen to anything on demand, but you had some control. You had some user control. You could pick what station to listen to out of the choices that you had back in the early days, back before we could pretty much choose to watch anything at any time over the internet. One next big one was VCRs, video cassette recorders. You could time shift and place shift, so you could watch somewhere else. You could take a recording to a friend's house, and you could watch something anytime that you wanted. So You might have a TV show that was on at 8 o'clock at night, and you could watch it days later, weeks later, months later, an hour later, whatever you wanted to do. So that's another level of user control that hadn't existed, at least in the mainstream before that. Video games, another one where you had all sorts of different controllers, different kinds of interfaces. I'll show a few of those here. Computers at home for everybody. So I put them, where I put them on the timeline when they became mainstream in terms of everyday life, not in terms of when there was the first computer. All sorts of different interaction possibilities, graphical user interfaces and the mouse and touchscreens and tablets and all that, as we then move on to smartphones and tablets. So each one of these introduced different possibilities. And we're best served if we think about the possibilities and don't think just how can we take traditional education and move it to a different medium, but how can we make the most of the medium to produce interesting, immersive, engaging learning experiences. One of the new technologies we have now is virtual reality. That's becoming more and more mainstream. With the Oculus Quest in particular, the standalone device, it's powerful, has gesture control. There are things we can do, and people can have them. They're not exactly affordable for everyone all the time, but they are something that's getting in that realm and getting closer to being something that people can have and that companies can have and universities can have. They have full motion control. We can do a lot with learn by doing simulations, all sorts of other things that we can possibly do. There was a survey done by the e-learning guild, which is kind of the best known US e-learning group that focuses specifically on workplace learning, and they run a number of conferences that are specific to workplace learning as well. They asked organizations, do you see opportunities for your organization to use VR in the future? This is a survey done in 2018, and very heavily the answer was yes. So there's a lot of interest within companies, certainly, in doing so. Augmented reality. So interact with the world in an augmented way. This is a screenshot from a version of Google Maps that's, I think, starting to get released, but I don't see it yet when I go to Google Maps on my phone. But it's at least something that's in the works and should be released soon. This is potentially great for, among other things, just-in-time performance support. How can we, at the moment of need, get some advantages, get something else to help us? Maybe in the business world, you would need less training. You certainly would with more performance support, and other things. So I may not need to learn how to navigate somewhere if I have, an expanded version of Google Maps. I may not need to learn that now with the existing Google Maps. Augmented reality, also popular in the future. Interestingly, a little even higher than VR, which surprised me. Do you see opportunities to use AR in the future and for learning? And the answer is very heavily yes. There's a lot of interest. Again, these were primarily at the US companies, but primarily there's a tremendous amount of interest in new technologies and using them for learning one way or another. And that puts us in a really nice position because there's openness to new thinking and new ideas and new ways of doing things that can be different and better and take advantage of the technologies that we have. Another one is holograms, three-dimensional projections. Artificial intelligence, I'll talk a little bit about more later, means sort of, a lot of different things. As part of what my own background is in the early days was AI in education. We can certainly use it for analytic purposes and sort of, intelligently analyzing those. But also, to me, the advantage is how do we really change the experience and not use that information just to analyze how people performed, but use it to produce a much better and more personalized experience for everyone, for each person. And that's the goal to me of AI in education. Other technologies, smartwatches, smart speakers, 5G networks help, foldable screens, rollable screens. On the right-hand side is a headset by a company that provides a way to interpret your brainwaves, and we can have some privacy issues with that, and it might feel strange, but there are interesting things we can do. So we'll leave it at that for now. Lots of technologies, lots of interesting things we have the potential to do. So one question then is, what kinds of experiences can we create with all these new technologies? And to me, key themes behind that are going to play a big role. What can we do behind that? So one is scaling up. One of the great things about technology is that we can scale up. If we can build something for one person, we can build it for 1 million people or 100 million people. Right? And this is, when you look back on the history of education, scaling up has always been a problem. Right? In the early days, we had apprenticeships. People would learn a craft by working with a master craftsman. So you'd want to learn to be a blacksmith, you would work with the expert. You would learn by doing. You would start simple and then work your way up. You would have an expert helping you along the way. You would get better and better. You would have a personal relationship. All of these things were great learning. And certainly with the right relationship, it's a great learning theory. It's supported by the educational and psychological research. And then when we had a need for mass education, there was a need to shift. And we ended up with classrooms which have a lot of, tended to have a lot of, memorizing and testing. You had one instructor, one teacher for a larger audience. You had to do something that would scale up. And that was the thing that scaled up. And it made sense. That's what else could you do? We had lots of workers. They didn't have access to, there weren't enough experts. You couldn't have a one-on-one relationship. But with technology, we can scale up. With technology, we can build it for one and make it personalized for many people, and everybody can have this experience. And that's one of the things that excites me so much about the new technology that we've had, and that I've been working with certainly for a number of years, since the late 80s, early 90s, and starting to see maybe things getting more mainstream and coming to fruition. Or so I hope and think we all have the chance to influence that. Another theme I want to talk about is user-centered design. It's one of the underlying themes, I think, behind good education. What you see on the screen there is a little MP3 player from 2002 by a company called iRiver here in the US, I believe. And it was a nice little MP3 player. It was one of the early ones. It's very small. You could take it with you while jogging. You could, do some things with it. It was a nice little machine. It was something you didn't have before. You didn't have portable music quite to this level and in such a small device. We had its predecessors, the Sony Walkman with cassette tapes, all sorts of other things. But this was a really nice little device, but it didn't catch on all that well. Same year, this one did, the iPod from Apple. So, why did that catch on when the iRiver, which seems that it would, seems as if it would in some ways. It's small and easy and portable. And a lot of the answer to me was the overall design, and not just the physical design of the Apple player, but the entire process. If you wanted to put music on your little MP3 player on the left, you had to hook it up to your PC, only a PC. You had to download a bunch of files from wherever you could get them, usually from ripping them from your own CDs, which wasn't something that non-technical people necessarily were comfortable doing. You had to name the files something memorable to you with the constraints that you had within Windows and its character, specific character restrictions. So don't use a period, because that's going to be for before the file, the MP3 for the file name. And then you would copy these onto your device by plugging your iRiver MP3 player into your computer, copying and pasting files. It basically functioned like an external hard drive. For everyday people who aren't in technology every day, this wasn't necessarily a pleasant and easy thing to do, and it had a lot of barriers. Apple's system was much easier. You downloaded things on your computer, which was easily set for that. You had iTunes. You would find things through a nice interface, put them on your computer. That was easy to do. Plug in your iPod to your computer. Everything would sync automatically. You had you would see the song names in normal normal wording, the actual name of the song, not a file name. You had playlists, and you had some other advantages. So this was a nicely designed thing in all ways, for learners' goals, for users' goals, and for people to be able to use easily on an everyday basis. So that's what design really means to me, and why this was a success, and a foundational principle that I think we want to use as we design education as we keep moving forward. Tell you a different story. This is from a study by a group at Case Western Reserve University from the late 90s, here in the US. The study was about radishes and chocolate chip cookies, amazingly, which is why you see radishes and chocolate chip cookies on your screen at this moment. People were asked to come into a room, and they were broken up into two groups. So one group, each room had radishes and cookies in the room. Radishes is something that is generally not considered particularly appetizing. Cookies is something that is generally considered appetizing. I agree with both of those assessments. Everyone has their preferences, but these are at least universal enough that they worked. One group was asked to come in and eat the cookies. They had it pretty good. The other group was asked to come in and eat the radishes while resisting the temptation of the cookies that were right nearby. It's not as much fun for them. This was not the end of the experiment. The experiment then had a second part, which was critical. In the second part, people were given an entirely different thing. They were given a very difficult, unsolvable problem. It was a problem that really you just were never going to solve. In a different area, had nothing to do with radishes, cookies, food, or anything. And what the researchers found was that the people who had eaten the radishes quit on problem solving much more quickly than the people who had gotten to eat the cookies. And the takeaway from this, and they did other experiments to confirm this, was not that chocolate chip cookies are magic and give you energy and you can do anything, though that may also be true, but was that the people had expended resources in eating something unpleasant and fighting off the temptation of the cookies. And that, again, confirmed by some other studies that they did, or certainly was what they found, when that resources, the sort of idea of energy and resources that we have is across areas and across domains. So here you are expending energy to not eat the cookies and eat something that you don't like, and that took away energy from your ability to problem solve. So it's a very general idea, this idea of resource limitation. So taking away from that, we need things that people are going to be into. We need things that people are going to be grabbed by and immersed in and find compelling, rather than sitting in through an experience that's a chore and that they find uninteresting. And that's the world that we live in now. Other foundational concepts: learning by doing. People learn well by doing something active, not by memorizing. Okay. Situated learning. They learn in context. Here are people learning, in an in-context way. So they learn something in the context of doing a real-life task that works really, really well. And education doesn't always have to be a task you'll do in real life, but doing it in the context of a task, not out of context learning. In the workplace, it's so critical to learn in the context of the job that you're going to be asked to do, much as possible. Just-in-time performance support is more of a workplace concept, where you learn, rather than learning in advance, you do something just in time. It's something to help you do the job as you're doing it, and it alleviates the need for upfront training. Workflow learning, again, for the workplace side, learning in the context of your workflow goes along with performance support a lot of ways. Collaborative learning is critical. You can learn with the help of other people, and I'll talk a little bit more about how technology can enable that. We're certainly seeing it. Intelligent analytics, what can we do with all this data that we can collect, with a concern about some privacy issues, but what can we do with it? And to me, it's not simply evaluate performance, which is certainly the corporate view that I've seen with some clients that I've worked with. The default is, what can we do to analyze people? And to me, the default is, what can we do to help people put themselves in a position to succeed, put themselves in a position to learn and enjoy and improve? And there are plenty of things, in my view, that we can do. In the workplace, job performance is the goal, a little different maybe than in a university setting. There's learning, just-in-time support, and process improvement, all toward performance. So, there are some differences between workplace learning and education, but in all of them, I see key roles for technology. What makes for a great learning experience? I run a lot of seminars. I teach at Columbia University as well. And when I do any of these things, I ask people what makes for a great learning experience. What's memorable, and what have you really learned? When have you really learned? And one of the things that has been consistent about the answers that I've received, and there have been quite a number of them, like thousands over the years, is very rarely are people's best learning experiences from the world of formal education. They are almost never from the world of corporate training. They're mostly from something informal that they chose to do, or that had some other personal meaning to them. This woman, these are not the actual people, but they sort of resemble the actual people who are in my classes. Her most memorable experience was when her sister taught her to drive a car. She worked with her sister. They bonded over the experience. They had a nice relationship. They had trust. She was able to learn by doing. There are a lot of things that came through here. This person learned to crochet from her aunt, so another personal learning experience. She connected with someone. This guy here had a learning experience that was memorable from childhood. He was on a soccer team. He had great teammates. He had a great coach. He learned a lot. He enjoyed the experience, and again, felt very, very motivated. Compare this to some comments about corporate learning experiences, which I'll put up quickly for you. They're not always like this, but there are still too many of these in the corporate learning world where I spend part of my time. People see it as a necessity, as a chore, as something they must do. They just want to get it done. These comments don't sound as pleasurable as the comments that we heard from the people who talked about their learning experiences in different environments. Okay. So what are some characteristics that we can take away? I start to talk a little bit about them. Personal relevance. All the great learning experiences we heard about were personally relevant in some ways. They cared about what they were doing. They found meaning. There was feedback from the environment, right? So if you're driving a car, there's feedback when, you don't go where you're supposed to go, or, something worse, hopefully not. Hopefully you don't run into anything or damage the car. When you're crocheting, you see where the stitch is wrong. When you're playing soccer, you see when you make a bad pass or where if you have a shot on goal and you miss. Feedback from a coach, somebody there for you, somebody there to help you, somebody there who cares about you and understands you and knows your skills and strengths and your weaknesses and what matters to you and helps you along the way. And that to me is such a key factor in all of the stories that I shared with you briefly. The driving and the crocheting and the soccer and many of the other memorable experiences had some form of a coach. And then, and the personal connection went with that. Feedback from peers. A lot of these, not all of them. Two of the stories I shared did not, but the soccer team had feedback from peers as well, your cohort, your co-teammates. Coaching again, so in a bigger way, not just feedback, but also providing coaching guidance, providing something where the coach is reaching out to you and explaining to you what to do or providing suggestions. So not just when something goes wrong or something goes well, but sort of a more proactive version of a coach. No, there's the opportunity to fail. In soccer, there's practice. I grew up playing basketball. There's practice. You get to make mistakes before the game. You get to make mistakes in a learning environment. You get drills where you're trying things out. Crocheting, there was a chance to practice. Driving, in this woman's experience, she didn't start out driving on a highway. She didn't even start out driving on a road. She started out driving in a parking lot where there was nobody around. And it was very much a safe environment. You're in the middle of the parking lot. You can make a lot of mistakes before you cause any damage. Another one is the freedom to experiment. People get to think about what they want to do. It's a lot of control and a lot of opportunity to try things out. Decide what you believe. Decide how you feel about doing things, what works for you within the context of what the expert said. So you're not going against expertise, but you're internalizing it for yourself. Others, learning by doing, competition, modeling your behavior, appreciation by someone else, interaction with a charismatic teacher or expert, and learner control. Okay, a couple more, and we've seen these mostly pass through these. Finally, a clear relevance between the person and the real life task. What can we do next? All sorts of different experiences, and I'm going to give you an example in just a minute. First, I want to briefly talk about the old model, what I consider to be the old model of learning technologies. You have learning theory, you have technology. At the intersection is learning technologies. And to me, that's only part of the story. And it causes us to take old educational models and try to mimic them in current technological setups, rather than rethinking, reimagining, taking advantage of what we can do with the new technology. The new model to me draws some areas: learning theory, technology and computer science, user experience design, cognitive science. To me, that's what learning technologies is all about. And other areas that I'm probably, not mentioning, it can come from anywhere. To me, it's a very holistic approach to learning and technology and thinking about what we can do. So before I wrap up, I want to walk you through part of a potential future learning experience. This is a student, and it's a student who is in his room. He's not in the classroom. He wants to learn about ancient Greece. So in this imaginary world, ancient Greece is projected on his wall in his room. And he might ask, as he looks at this, is that the Acropolis? In fact, it is. And he would have an AI coach come up and say, it is. This is a coach who would understand him. And I guess is a step beyond what we can do now. But some things are not that far from what we can do now. The AI coach says it is. There are actually a number of buildings known as Anacropolis in ancient Greece. So this is interesting. I did not know that. The word Acropolis means the highest point, but the Acropolis in Athens is the famous one. Did it always look the same over the years? Okay, the AI coach gives some more information. We don't know much about the architectural appearance, but here's a major addition, an entry gate. Look at it. Okay, so he's having a conversation. He's learning based partly on his interests, based partly on what a coach thought he had to say and should see. And he's intrigued. He wants to ask a question. Who is Pisistratus? You just mentioned him as the person who built the gate. This was the ruler of ancient Athens, son of Hippocrates. We could go more in that direction, but he goes back to the Acropolis. It's big. Yes, it is. And this could go on and on. He could also work with others, not just the AI coach, but with peers. In this world, he then visits Greece today, and he sees where he is. The AI coach is there with him again. His peers are there with him. He can have conversations with peers. So lots of different ways we could go. Some key elements of this experience. It's experiential in a very realistic context. His coaching guidance and feedback. He has control, but the learner's assisted and advised. It's an immersive, personalized experience, and it could have had more learning by doing, and it would in a longer version. Okay. I'll gloss over this a little bit in the interest of time. We have a particular potential future training experience where he also, in his part-time job, works in a retail store and helps a customer, again, with the AI coach walking him through. So we could spend more time on this, but I know we're a little bit short on time. So again, it's a similar experience, and I have other talks posted where you can see this. If you're really interested, just let me know. So same kind of thing where he's working with a customer in his part-time job. So I'm going to jump ahead to the end and have time for questions. Now, one quick Steve Jobs quote. Well, it's not a Steve Jobs quote. One quick quote from me that relates to Steve Jobs, which is, sometimes invention is the mother of necessity. When Steve Jobs and Apple invented the first iPhone, for example, they didn't have a focus group. They didn't have people telling them, this is what I want. They saw the need. They invented something new and different that met needs of people. They talked to people. They understood the audience. But it wasn't that they were just building what they were told to do. They were imagining, here's something that could really achieve a lot of people's goals and help them. And that's the kind of thinking that I tend to personally believe in as well. A few points to sum up. I believe strongly in designing new experiences that make the most of new technologies. Following active learning, situated learning principles. There's research behind this. It's a mix of research and creativity and imagination all rolled into one. Just-in-time learning and performance support are key, certainly in the workplace, but in today's world, people expect to be able to learn small things quickly. Not everything can be or should be a monolithic university course or course of any kind. And experiences can be immersive, relevant, personalized, and this results in learners emotionally connecting to their experiences. So to me, technology can best be used to humanize learning rather than to dehumanize it, as it often can be today. You want to see it humanizing. Put people in a position where they can get what they want, pursue things they find interesting, maintain human contact, maintain contact with an automated system that helps them pursue their own interests and learn things that are relevant to them and in a way that is relevant to them. So there's a mix between learner control and following the program. Both of those play a role, but there's technology can help us all the way. And in the end, to me, it's all about the experience. And I'll close on a quote from Isaac Asimov, well-known writer and scientist and thinker. In 1983, he predicted the world of 2019, which we have now passed. And he said, education, which must be revolutionized in the new world, will be revolutionized by the computer. And he views it as there'll be an opportunity for every youngster, finally, and every person to learn what they want to learn in their own time, at their own speed, in their own way. And education will become fun. Notice he was saying it was generally not fun. Education will become fun because it will bubble up from within. It won't be imposed from without. It'll come from within. And to me, that's how I see technology. If we reimagine, reinvent, follow a lot of these principles, what we can do to build that educational environment, both in the educational world and in workplace learning. And with that, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure being here today. And there's, I think, just a little bit of time for comments. So thank you once again, and I hope you enjoyed this.
Thank you, dear David. Nice to be with you in here.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think we have any questions in the live chat, but I have a very, very short question because I know that we need to move on to the next one as quickly as possible. Thank you very much. First of all, this was really enlightening, and I think it's a very important point for us to start reimagining what we always think education is. We all think that we know what education is, but it's actually, it's a becoming. It's not something that is already out there. You talked about scaling up. Actually, most of the concepts that you've talked about referred to this change in the education. But especially about scaling up, I felt like at the same time you're talking about individualizing it. Yes, we can reach bigger groups of people, but at the same time it's being individualized. So this puts a lot of responsibility on the students, on the learners, whatever they want to learn. It's their sort of, they need to step up to learn these things and find the information themselves. So in this sense, how does scaling up and individualized instruction reflect on our philosophy of education? From, if we want to reimagine it, how, I know that you have listed a couple of points for us, but philosophically, how should we look at education?
No, that's a great question, I think, and a challenging one. To me, there are a couple of things. One is the individualization I tend to view as where the technology can help, especially as it improves. So it's where the AI can come in, I think, and help. So that, you might have people who are most comfortable with a more, with more of a coach, with an AI coach playing more of the role of a teacher. So you're not going to be in a class with person, but much more of an advisor and a much more proactive role, right? So it's there, there can be learner control, but you go into something new and you don't necessarily even know what to ask, right? So some of it is personality. Some people want to just jump in and they don't care if they know anything. They want to just try to find things. Some people, and sometimes it's just a situation, right? Like, I think I myself am different in different situations. Sometimes I'm in an area where I'm fairly familiar and I look, I know where I want to go and I'll listen to somebody else if they will have something to say, but I kind of know where I want to go. Sometimes I don't know, right? Like even when, I don't know, for example, when I was first putting together my home video studio, for example, as the pandemic hit and all of a sudden there was no office, there was no anything, and I was going to be online all the time. I did a lot of research on my own. We have video people at our company, but they're not here, right? They can help, but I also wanted to know they're not in my house, and I wanted to see some things that could fit and experiment. And I started doing some research on my own, but I also wanted to consult experts. So the more I could consult those people, the more I did, right? So I wanted more guidance, I guess is what I'm saying at that point, right? And then later on, it was, okay, now I can adjust. So I think it's a mix of things. And I think it's that those are not incompatible, and that it's a mix of situation and personality and finding your own role. And that the best way of scaling up is sort of exactly that you have a mix and that you can help drive it, but you also are not stranded on your own.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks so much.